talked about a number of topics in the past few months. I consider them pretty much foundational, but one thing I may have skipped, or at least not spent enough detail on, is the attributes of God. What is God like? What attributes can we attribute to him? And what might they mean for us? So here we are again, and we're approaching a pretty big topic today, the attributes of God. Who is God and what is he like? And this is a topic upon which volumes have been written, and I don't think they've covered it all yet. One of the aspects that I didn't mention but is implied is that God is infinite. So you can never be done with something that's infinite. But be that as it may, there are a number of other attributes that have been mentioned in the Bible about God, mentioned or demonstrated. And the attributes of God can be divided into two different categories. This is an academic construction, but still it's helpful to talk about them this way. And the first set of attributes are those attributes possessed only by God. Attributes that you can ascribe to God and no one and nothing else. And some of those attributes are seen in the reading. Oh, you just read it, so I thought you read it on screen, but some of those attributes can be seen in Isaiah 6.
Ah, okay. What verse would you like me to read, Pat?
1 through 7, Phil.
7, okay. Where does 7 end? There it is. I see 8, so that'll work. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. This is labeled Isaiah's commission. Is that what it says?
Yes.
Yeah, commission. So this is Isaiah talking, basically, right?
Basically, it's his account, yes.
Yeah. Above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 of the wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Period. So, a seraph is like a big bird with wings, or is it a man with wings?
Well, it's an angel.
Angel, okay.
And actually, the word seraph has its root in the word serpent.
Yeah, that's like what I was kind of thinking, like a, I don't know what those giraffes or whatever those things are called.
Gargoyles?
Well, not so much a gargoyle, more like a lion with wings.
Oh, yes. Harpy?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, you're kind of in the right
Griffin,
category.
that's what I was thinking.
Griffin. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're kind of in the right category. It would be something attractive. In fact, Satan is often referred to as a seraphim, or as a seraph.
Okay.
And he was the most beautiful creature created.
Okay.
So along with having multiple wings and being somewhat serpentine, they are very attractive. They are very beautiful. But that's what a seraph is. And they take different forms.
Yep. And they didn't have like talons or anything they could use to touch the coals with. They had to use a pair of tongs.
Yes. They didn't want to burn their own talons.
Okay.
There's a lot of symbolism in there. The burning ember is a sign of purification.
But you figure that they'd be able to withstand that.
Right, but if they touch it, are they going to contaminate it? Because only God is truly holy.
Okay, so that burning ember is basically God?
Well, it's his source of purification.
His source of purification. Okay.
Like, yeah, you got unclean lips and all the people have unclean lips, so let me purify it for you.
Yeah.
And, burning, they call it cauterization medically,
Right.
or cauterization.
Right.
That it's a good way of stopping bleeding, and it also kills germs.
Yep.
Hurts like bejeebers,
Yep.
but it does kill germs. So that's part of the meaning of that image.
Okay.
But it also tells us a few things about God, some of his characteristics. Again, characteristics that are pertain only to God. God is omnipotent, and that means that God has absolute power, that nothing is more powerful than God, doesn't even come close.
So where did you get that out of this verse?
I'm coming to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
from the that's okay. You're so anxious to learn, Phil.
I'm saying I didn't say the word omnipotent.
No, you didn't, but the sense of his power, well, first, the seraphs say that he is mighty.
Yep.
And the seraphs themselves are pretty powerful.
Right.
If their voices alone can shake the doorposts of heaven, imagine when they touch something, besides, the tongs and the coal.
Right.
But God is in charge of these powerful beings, so he's got to be more powerful than them.
Right.
So yeah, he is indeed very powerful. At least we can see that from the reading. But another expression of his omnipotence is he created the universe.
Okay.
And he did it just by the power of speech. God said, and it happened. And that's pretty powerful. That is, if people want to argue about limitations of power and so forth, it's hard to quantify it, but nothing and no one is more powerful than God.
Right.
He's top of the list with a big gap to second. So he has a great amount of power. I would argue all power. People ask the question, if God is so powerful, can he create a rock that he himself cannot move? And I've always answered it, well, God created his word that he cannot break. So if it accomplishes his will, he can make a rock that he cannot move. It's all about what God wants to have happen and what's beneficial. So he's very, very powerful. Yep. Very, very powerful. And based on his omnipotence, he is sovereign. He has absolute reign and absolute control of all things, both in rights and in practice. Nothing happens unless God causes it or allows it. And that's an important distinction, because there are many things that God doesn't necessarily like to see happen, but he does allow them, and there's a purpose behind that. Nobody thwarts God or gets anything past God, but that doesn't mean he likes everything that's going to happen. And we'll talk about more of that in a minute. He's also omniscient. He knows all things. This was one that wasn't necessarily in that reading,
Yep.
But it's still an attribute of God.
Right.
Did I say that Isaiah 6 shows some of these attributes? Just want to make sure, like truth in advertising and all that. But he's omniscient. He knows all things, and this ranges from facts of science, which basically he created anyway, to all the details of an individual's life, even the small little details. The Psalms claim, or they affirm, that nothing gets by God. You can't hide from God anywhere. He's already going to be there if you try to hide. He knows what you're saying. He knows what you're saying before you say it. He knows what you're thinking. He knows everything about you. He knows how many hairs are on your head. And actually, it says he numbers the hairs on your head, I believe, which means it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3. I mean, he could count that.
Right.
He knows in infinite detail. So he is an all-knowing God. He is omnipresent, which means God is everywhere at all times. He knows no limitation of space. In fact, God functions outside of space, outside of the material world, although he also functions inside of it. But if he can speak and create the universe, he's got to be existing outside of the universe to do that. He's got to be able to exist outside of the universe. We don't even know where our universe ends, but God is there. And he exists outside of time. He has a timeless existence, so that God is still in the past, he's still in he's in the present, and he's already in the future. He knows how things are going to turn out. He knows how things are going to end. He's told us a little bit about that in the Bible, that Satan loses, Christ wins, and if you believe in Christ, you're good for eternity. Spoiler alert, but that's an important spoiler. That's a good spoiler alert. Probably the biggest attribute, which is certainly reflected in the reading in Isaiah, is God's holiness. God is the most holy thing in existence. In fact, God's character defines holiness. We know what holiness is because of God. Right. It's not we had a concept of holiness and then applied it to God. We got to know, God revealed himself to us, and from that we understood holiness. And holiness has two different aspects. One is that it is set apart, it is distinct, it is separate. And God certainly is separate from humanity. Isaiah talks about, I am a person of unclean lips, out of a people of unclean lips. Well, God isn't among those people. God isn't associated. He is distinct from those people. And even regular everyday objects, if they were going to be used in the temple, they were considered holy. That once they were consecrated for use, you could only use them for certain things, certain activities in the temple. They could be defiled, and you'd have to reconsecrate them. Doesn't mean that they changed their essential nature. It just means that they were consecrated and made separate from the rest of items like them. So being separate and distinct is one aspect of holiness. The other aspect of holiness is that there is no evil or malice contained whatsoever. That in holiness, everything that is done in goodness, is done in righteousness, it's done for a benefit, it's not done for harm. It doesn't mean everything's pleasant. I always want to stress that, because people think that, if this is going to be for my good, I'm going to like it. Well, I've never had anybody go to the dentist and have a filling and say they liked it. But you have to do it. The dentist is working for your benefit, even if it doesn't feel that way at the moment. So holiness, yes, it does mean righteous activity. It's not malicious, but that doesn't necessarily mean pleasant. Now, actually, this above section could all be listed under the characteristic of holiness, because, again, these attributes apply only to God. And because they apply only to God, that makes them distinct, and it further makes God distinct. But again, the attributes that are infinite in nature, the omni attributes, are the ones that are only attributed to God. Now, the other set of characteristics is characteristics that God shares with humanity, although he shares it with humanity imperfectly because we are fallen. Right. Just like we reflect the image of God, and that image was never taken away, but the fall has blurred it. That we can see aspects of God and human nature, but we can also see how they've been corrupted. So these next attributes, we can understand them by our own experience, but we don't necessarily express them righteously as God does. And the first one that people are all liking, and it's a very popular attribute, is love. God is love, and God cares about us. God is love means God cares about us. He is connected with us. He wants to be in relationship with us. God loves us unconditionally. We don't have to do anything to earn his love. He loves us because he loves unconditionally. Partly he loves us because we are his creation, but we don't have to work to maintain that love. He loves us because of who he is, not because of who we are. That is true unconditional love. And the other characteristics like mercy, which is withholding a deserved consequence, compassion, which is giving someone what they need, not what they want, grace, which is an undeserved gift, and forgiveness, which is erasing the record of wrongdoing. Those are all based on his love. Now, God also has another side, one that people don't like hearing about quite as much. God is a jealous God. He does not appreciate spiritual infidelity. Right. That he has given his all for us. He's made a covenant with us.
I wouldn't really call it jealousy. I would just call it more truth. If there is no other God.
True, yes.
Then you can't, what you're doing is not real. If you're praying to a different God,
Well, true. It is a violation of truth.
Right.
That is very true. But even if you are acting like the other God is true, cases of infidelity, I'm not sure they're always based in a deep emotional commitment. Although, well, I always tell men, testosterone is not your friend. Uh-huh. That, in the heat of the moment, you can experience a lot of things that seem real, but down the line you realize, well, maybe not. What was I thinking? I don't know. So, yes, the other gods are not real.
Right.
Although there's a mention, I have to look it up for next time or for soon, that idols are actually demons. So there is an aspect of reality, that there is something there to worship, but not the idol or the God we're thinking of.
Okay.
It's something different. But for the most part, you're right. There is no other God,
right.
And he doesn't like sharing time. So yeah, he's a jealous God. He does not like infidelity, spiritual infidelity, and he's given himself completely to his people. He expects the same kind of commitment, or at least he expects us to be moving toward that commitment. This is sort of a fluid and kinetic situation, but he expects us to be walking in his direction, not away from his direction. And that's kind of what jealousy is about. And you have to kind of debate about the aspect of God's jealousy. And how do we compare it to our own experience? And if someone is trying to woo your mate, your spouse, that would make us very angry, and we would work at stopping it. We would intervene because we are jealous. We don't want our spouse to be taken by someone else. We want fidelity.
Well, I mean, yes, we don't want to lose them, but just to take, I guess, kind of the emotion out of it. If your spouse feels that this is a better person for them, who are we to stop them? Besides the fact that they made a commitment that they're not breaking.
Well, that's a pretty big aspect.
Yeah.
Breaking commitment. I'm not sure I want to commit myself to someone who breaks commitments.
Right, but then that's between you and the spouse, as opposed to you and the person trying to force the commitment break.
Well, that can be argued. That's a very liberal idea.
I guess.
Not many. One of the few things in our society that's still considered taboo is infidelity. If you have a partner and you've made a commitment to a partner,
right,
breaking that commitment is frowned upon sort of across the board.
Yeah.
No matter if you're heterosexual, homosexual, transgender, if you're in a relationship, that's your relationship. That's your focus.
Right.
And unless you intentionally break up or sever the relationship somehow, legally, officially, just kind of going off and checking out other options is...
Yeah, that's not what I'm speaking. I'm speaking more big picture wise,
Well, yeah, there are times. Yeah, the big picture, if you separate in a socially acceptable manner.
Yeah. Yeah, not just last night.
Yeah, right. So that's the aspect of jealousy. And there are times when there's a legal separation, but there's still a connection.
Yep.
There are people who have said, well, I don't want my spouse anymore, but you can't have them either. That's a little unhealthy, but that's still an aspect of jealousy.
Yep.
And you really can't take jealousy out of the aspect of commitment and relationship. Groucho Marx is famous for saying, I would never join a club that would have me as a member. And I've kind of adjusted that to say, I would never have an affair with anyone who would have an affair with me.
Yeah.
Because if they'll have an affair with me, they'll have an affair on me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing about a new partner that's going to change behavior necessarily.
How do we get on this, by the way?
I don't know. Oh, jealousy. You were arguing for...
Yeah, that God is not jealous. He's just stating facts.
Right. Well, that's a good rabbit trail. There's somebody out there that's saying, good point. Yeah, I get that. Or there's somebody out there saying, yeah, I'm going to call a lawyer now.
Yeah.
Either way.
Or Philip's an idiot.
I didn't want to mention that one. But going down the list of God's attributes that we have in common, it gets a bit more severe that God has wrath.
Yeah.
There is a wrath that God possesses upon those who are disobedient, those who have intentionally turned their back or turned away from God. And wrath is simply administering appropriate, albeit severe, consequences for actions. And this is an extension of God's anger. God does get angry, and there is wrath. And that's just not Old Testament. In the Old Testament, God did administer his wrath more immediately. In the New Testament, God really hasn't changed his nature, but his timing is a little different. Again, in the Old Testament, he would administer wrath sort of immediately, or at least in real time.
Right.
In the New Testament, it takes on an eternal dimension. That, okay, God's not going to get you in this life, but if you are against God in this life, well, he will respect that decision in eternity.
Right.
And you'll be separated from him for eternity. So, he has a wrath, and through Jesus, we escape that wrath. That's about the only way we can do it. But yes, he is a wrathful God, and God is also a just God, something to remember. And justice means that he administers decisions impartially. He's not biased. He doesn't have favors. You can't sway God in your favor. Whatever the criteria is, God is just, and that's how he uses it universally.
Okay.
So these are some aspects of God, and if you put some of these aspects together, that God is a holy God, and God is a just God, and we are not.
Right.
Another aspect of God's holiness in the reading from Isaiah, not only do the seraphim say holy, 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 which is the Old Testament way of saying superlative holy, but Isaiah himself, his fallenness is suddenly exposed. He's in the presence of a holy God, and he has impure lips. Apparently, that didn't bother him much before.
Yeah.
But standing in the presence of God, suddenly that highlighted his deficit. And again, if you're going to combine these characteristics, you can see that people being fallen don't really have a lot of hope. I mean, just these characteristics alone put us in a pretty dire situation. And that's been something that's been known throughout God's history. Phil, if you can read Exodus 33. This is talking about Moses, and Moses asked to see God.
And which verse?
19 and 20.
19.
33, 19 and 20.
And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live.
Right, so that's a message given to Moses way back in Exodus, that people in and of themselves, I want to stress, cannot be in the presence of God. They will not survive. A couple of ways to think about that. It doesn't mean that God is necessarily malicious. I don't think he's malicious. That's part of being holy. But there are certain characteristics that just stand. I mean, for instance, you can't put paper in fire and expect the paper to make out well. Not that the fire is malicious, it's just the way the combination works out. Or if you have hay fever, in the spring you will have runny eyes and you'll sneeze a lot. That's just the way it is. You cannot stand in the presence of allergens and not have an allergic reaction. So, God's attributes of wrath and anger and so forth isn't necessarily a matter of malicious or anger, but it's more a matter of this is just how the combination works. If you try to stand in my presence, it's not going to go well for you. Right. And if we were just stuck in that particular situation, we would have no hope. But fortunately, we're not stuck in that situation. I just want to bring this part of the study to a close to give you all hope in light of these attributes. We can depend also on God's love because he has given us a solution to this problem. In Romans 5, a short verse, but very powerful, God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And since we have been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? And that pretty much sums it up. Yes, we would be in trouble on our own, but through Jesus Christ, we have salvation. We are saved from his wrath. And that's the introduction to the attributes of God. In part 2, I want to look a little bit at basically the problem of evil.
Very good.